let's continue with the Alexander thing. The last one we did was Siege of Gaza, I think. So now we're jumping into the next one. The next one is Battle of Gaugamela.
For Alexander the Great's legendary campaign against Darius III of the Achaemenid Empire, the winter of 332 to 331 was the calm before the storm. During that time, the Macedonian army had what amounted to a holiday in the gentle lands adjacent to the River Nile. But that holiday was now over. As the mountain snows thawed and the spring began, two of the greatest armies of the age were on the march. Alexander's force was smaller, but had proven itself supreme multiple times in the realms of discipline, technology, and command. Darius's newly raised imperial army was massive, its warriors drawn from the seemingly endless reserves of his continent-spanning empire. Persia was about to face off for one last time against Macedon at the Great Battle of Gaugamela in 331. Having better gear makes a big difference in the chaos of an ancient battle, but it still helps out today, where those with the most security are least presenting theoretically Harvey specific T-Virado. It have an exclusive NordVPN money back earlier. Alexander. Ever since his epochal triumph at Issus 2 years earlier, Alexander had been methodically reducing every potential center of resistance in the western part of the Achaemenid Empire. Syria had been secured and administered, followed by Phoenicia, Palestine, and the jewel in Persia's crown, Egypt. But as spring of 331 BC arrived, it was once more time to move on, this time into Persia's imperial heartland. The advance would be risky. Disconcerting news was even now arriving from Greece concerning Agis' revolt. All the king could feasibly do at this point, without abandoning everything he had accomplished, was to send a great fleet of 100 ships to aid any harbour supporting the Macedonian cause. Apart from that, putting down the Greek rebels would be left to Antipater and the men under his command. With that considered, Alexander again turned east, where Darius and a colossal Persian army were waiting for him. Following one final bout of administrative fine-tuning, the king marched his army to Thapsacus, a major link between Syria and Mesopotamia. He arrived between July and August, but an advance force under Hephaestion had already been present for some time, and managed to construct 2 pontoon bridges over the Euphrates ready for the army's use. As a sign of the Macedonian engineers' skill, these bridges lacked a final stretch on the far bank, preventing any enemy force from effectively using them, and this proved to be a wise precaution. Observing the invaders crossing from a safe distance was a force of 3,000 Persian cavalry outriders, commanded by one of Darius's satraps, Mazaeus. Arrian seems to imply that Mazaeus' horse Darius was a force of 3,000 Persian cavalry outriders, commanded by one of Darius's satraps, Mazaeus. Arrian seems to imply that Mazaeus' horsemen were supposed to stop the crossing of Alexander's vastly superior army, but it is more probable that Darius simply required intelligence as to what the Macedonians were doing. There was realistically no chance for Mazaeus to prevent the crossing by himself. Having learned from previous defeats, Darius III had come up with a plan. 70 years earlier, another invasion force, famously including 10,000 Greek mercenaries, had marched directly down the east bank of the Euphrates with the aim of taking Babylon, as the Persians believed Alexander, notoriously bold as he was, would. In that previous clash, the invaders had arrived on a wide, cavalry-friendly plain known as Connexa and were stopped in their tracks. Darius hoped to repeat that feat at the same place, further relying on the blistering Mesopotamian sun and scorched earth tactics to deny the Macedonians food, fodder, and comfort. But while this cunning plan took Alexander's directness into account, it did not account for the king's unpredictability. As a lover of Hellenic works, he too was educated in Xenophon's Anabasis. Therefore, upon crossing the Euphrates, Alexander struck northeast across the Mesopotamian plain, beelining towards the other great river, Tigris. Not only did this completely derail Darius's preparations, but the cooler northern temperatures would be better for the Macedonian army. Upon seeing Alexander's move north, Mazaeus rode hurriedly to inform his master in Babylon. To the credit of the great king and his commanders, this unexpected turn of events did not paralyze Persian preparations, and a strategic pivot was quickly made. The imperial army would move north towards Arbela and confront Alexander somewhere on the Tigris. All the while, Mazaeus would venture upriver, dispatching a tightly knit web of scouting forces to keep an eye on the Macedonian monarch. By the time Alexander got near, Darius's army would be ready and waiting. Meanwhile, Alexander himself was still crossing the arid Mesopotamian plain, capturing a few of Mazaeus' scouts in the process. It was from these captives that the Macedonians learned, somewhat vaguely, that the main Persian army had taken up a position on the Tigris and was set to throw the Macedonians back if they attempted to ford the river. Moreover, estimates of the sheer size of Darius's massive army were also obtained. If Arrian is to be believed, such speculation simply made Alexander desire a confrontation all the more rapidly. Upon finally arriving at the upper reaches of the Tigris in mid-September, the Macedonian king and his army found neither Darius nor his 100,000+ men. Faulty or deceptive intelligence from the captured scout, it seemed. Still, deprived of his immediate fight, this did allow the Macedonians to cross to the far bank relatively easily, after which they were given a well-deserved rest before moving on. At about the same time, Darius, vaguely aware of where Alexander was, reached Arbela. The two armies, now on the same side of the Tigris, were getting perilously close to one another. While Alexander continued pressing on with the river on his right and the mountains on his left, Darius managed to find a perfect replacement battlefield for the Great Plain of Conquests near the small village of Gaugamela. He marched his troops up and immediately set labourers to work, flattening hills, clearing rocks and trees, and employing every possible measure to make the plain as flat as possible. The great king was so distracted by this that he failed to take the low hills 3 miles west. En route, Alexander had two minor encounters with Persian cavalry forces under Mazaeus, but they were easily put to flight. Further prisoners taken in these engagements revealed that Darius's massive army was at Gaugamela, by that point only around 10 miles away. Further investigation uncovered the ground-leveling operations and made Alexander realize that Darius didn't intend to move from his pre-selected battlefield, allowing him to encamp and give his men another substantial rest before the climactic battle. During this short lull, the Persians utilized infiltration and assassination tactics, attempting to turn the Greek soldiers against Alexander with promises of gold and other good things. One of these letters was intercepted, and the king debated reading it aloud before the Greeks to emphasize his trust in them. He was deterred from doing so by the ever-cautious Parmenion, who reasoned that avarice recognized nothing as a crime, not even the murder of a king. Instead, the letter was suppressed and the camp fortified.
What?
He was deterred from doing so by the ever-cautious Parmenion, who reasoned that avarice recognized nothing as a crime, not even the murder of a king. Instead, the letter was suppressed and the camp fortified. While most of the army recuperated in camp, Alexander assembled a strong cavalry escort and went to personally scout both the battlefield terrain and Darius's army. When he crested the hill overlooking it, Peter Green suggests that the Macedonian king might have second-guessed his earlier bravado about facing the Persians so brazenly, for what he saw was an army larger even than that he had faced at Issus. More than that, it seemed far superior in armament and skill, possessing a large quantity of fearsome eastern cavalry. That night, Alexander sat awake in his tent for hours on end, analyzing the potential of each Persian unit and considering the potential damage they might inflict, along with the tactics he could use to gain victory. At some point, Parmenion arrived and suggested that a night attack be carried out, but Alexander stated that he would not demean victory by stealing victory like a thief. Alexander must defeat his enemies openly and honestly. But even Arrian, who usually gushes with praise over the Macedonian king, found it likely that this haughty response was just a smokescreen. He believed instead that these lofty words probably indicated confidence in danger rather than vanity. Rather than the morality of victory, refusal to engage in an incredibly risky, potentially catastrophic night attack was instead simply a sound tactical decision. Pitched battles had worked wonders thus far, and so there was no need to gamble everything in the dark. This proved to be a shrewd decision indeed. While the Macedonian army was resting in preparation for the coming battle, Darius's troops, lacking a camp with fortifications, were actually drawn up in full battle order throughout the night in fear of any surprise assault by the enemy. Not only did the consequential lack of sleep exhaust the vast array of Achaemenid warriors, but waiting hour after hour with nothing to show for it demoralized the Persians greatly, sapping their spirit. Back in the secure Macedonian camp, Alexander at last crossed the T's and dotted the I's of his intricate battle plan, and then simply went to sleep in the early morning hours. When the sun rose above the horizon on the morning of the great Battle of Gaugamela, Alexander did not rise with it. Instead, unconcerned by the gravity of the occasion, he slept. On their own volition, the various battalions had breakfast and assembled for battle. Only when knowledge of Alexander's plan became necessary for deployment did Parmenion, probably rolling his eyes a little, go and rouse the king from his slumber. No doubt curious as to just how the king was able to sleep so soundly when the largest army ever seen was right there over the hill, Parmenion asked him. Alexander simply responded by saying that he had indeed been worried when the Persians had been retreating and laying waste to the line of march, but now that pitched battle was on the cards, by Heracles, he has done exactly what I wanted. Not long later, Alexander and his army strode onto the Gaugamela plain in battle-ready formation. Finally, the Macedonian king and his Persian counterpart were face to face once more, and the great battle for Asia was about to begin. But this clash was not to be the walkover the Macedonians might have expected after their winter of luxury. Darius's army was so massive that its flanks extended beyond Alexander's by a significant margin, and outflanking was virtually assured. The Persian left and right wings were commanded by Bessus and Mazaeus respectively, while the great king Darius III himself was stationed in the center. On the left, Bessus commanded thousands of cavalry from his own satrapy of Bactria, together with Sogdians and Aracosians. Additional mounted strength was drawn from the nomadic peoples beyond Persia's northern frontier, who were in military alliance with the empire, such as the Sake and Dahe Scythians fighting as cataphracts or horse archers. On the right, Mazaeus had Syrians, Mesopotamians and Medes under his leadership, flanked towards the center by Parthian and even more Sake cavalry. Tepurians, Icanians, Albanians and Sacassinians from the Caucasus and the areas around the Caspian Sea formed the link between the right and center. The vanguard of Mazaeus' wing was composed of Armenian and Cappadocian riders. Mixed Persian infantry and Greek mercenaries formed Darius' center, together with the king's personal cavalry, immortals, and the Indian cavalry. Two more exotic units made their debut in this massive clash. First were the great king's 200 scythed chariots, somewhat experimental shock vehicles with blades on their wheels, tailored to break apart the fearsome Macedonian phalanx. 100 of these chariots were drawn up just to the right of Bessus' Bactrians, and 50 each in front of the Indians and next to Mazaeus' Armenians. 15 majestic elephants accompanied the Indian contingent. All in all, the Persian army at Gaugamela consisted of between 100,000 and 150,000 troops, 30 to 40,000 of which were cavalry. Alexander's army of around 40,000 infantry and 7,000 cavalry opposed this gargantuan force. On the surface, its units were drawn up as they usually were. Phalanx battalions made the solid center.
What the fuck?
As they used this gargantuan force. On the surface, its units were drawn up as they usually were. Phalanx battalions made the solid center. Parmenion and his allied Thessalian cavalry stood guard on the left, while Alexander, the companion cavalry, and the king's usual Agrianes, archer and Hypaspist strike force prepared to smash the enemy army on the right. But there were a few notable differences designed by the king for precisely this occasion. Both the Macedonian left and right flank guards were angled inward in order to better withstand a Persian encirclement attack. The second line of 7,000 Greek hoplite infantry was also arrayed behind the first Macedonian line, with orders to turn and face any attempt at encirclement by the enemy. Hopefully, twisting the flanks as he had and deploying such a reserve would hold the Achaemenid cavalry off until the battle was won. Confident in his
Did my video quality just fucking drop? Fucking serious.
His armies was won. Hopefully, twisting the flanks as he had and deploying such a reserve would hold the Achaemenid cavalry off until the battle was won. Confident in his army's supreme discipline and fully prepared to exploit Darius's plan, Alexander ordered his entire line to gradually shift to the right. Simultaneously, the king personally took his right wing and began an oblique advance, as though aiming to outflank the Persian line with his numerically inferior forces. At once reacting to this unexpected maneuver, Bessus flexed his strength by stretching his cavalry even further out, always keeping outside of the Macedonians. This in turn dragged units away from the Persian center. All of a sudden, it became obvious to the Achaemenid leadership that by edging his army to the right, Alexander was attempting to move the battle away from the leveled plain, therefore rendering much of Darius's long-planned strategy null and void. Regardless of his lacking numbers, Alexander continued drifting right until he was just short of the cleared zone. Anxious to avoid fighting on the rough ground, Bessus finally committed his wing by launching a direct charge against the Macedonian right. This commitment was precisely the move Alexander had been attempting to provoke. As his companion cavalry joined battle with the ferocious Sacae-Bactrian horse that formed Bessus's vanguard, the Macedonian king fed additional units into the fray from deeper on his flank. Naturally, Bessus responded by committing the majority of his strength with the hope of crushing Alexander and rolling up his army. As this engagement was progressing on the Macedonian right, Darius III believed that the moment had come to wipe out this troublesome invader from the west once and for all. On the other Persian flank, Mazaeus launched an overwhelming cavalry assault against the ever-stalwart Parmenion, who was, as always, desperately outnumbered. All across the line, Persian scythed chariots, 200 of them, barreled forwards in an all-out rush to smash the Macedonian phalanx. Exercising the lockstep discipline for which they were known, Alexander's phalanx battalions refused to be intimidated by these contraptions. Instead, they simply opened lanes within their ranks, into which these horse-drawn chariots sped impotently. A few casualties were inflicted by the chariots here and there, but an effective combination of Agriani javellineering, royal guard, and army grooms put an end to Darius's wildcard, ripping the drivers from their vehicles and killing them. On Alexander's right, the clash between the companion cavalry and Bessus's horse intensified still further. For the Macedonians, it was a ferocious battle against the odds, with Peter Green stating that Alexander's 1,100-strong spearmen were fighting a force 10 times its own size. Still more Persian cavalry units from the center entered the fray, attempting to dislodge these brilliant Macedonian warriors. It was then that Alexander saw his great opportunity. The singular focus on Bessus's engagement with Alexander had revealed a dangerous weakness in the Persian left center, precisely where Darius himself was positioned. The line had been frayed, and many units that would otherwise have been protecting the great king were now absent, committed to fighting against the companions. Now, leading a spearhead of his companions, hypaspists, and several unengaged phalanx units, Alexander charged Darius directly. With the raising of a great battle cry, the Macedonian king's wedge mercilessly cut into the formations surrounding his Persian counterpart. Fighting was brutal and hand-to-hand. Macedonian cavalry spears thrust forward into the faces of the Persians, and Alexander even had more than one horse killed under him. With the help of the phalangites, Alexander scythed his way closer and closer to Darius. the Persian king, who had grown increasingly uneasy ever since the battle began, is said by Curtius to have drawn his sword and prepared to defend himself. However, even with the fate of his centuries-old empire on the line, Darius's skittish nature once more got the best of him. Faced by the rampaging elites of the Macedonian army, the King of Kings turned tail and ran for his life. Of the Macedonia once more got the best of him. Faced by the rampaging elites of the Macedonian army, the King of Kings turned tail and ran for his life. Witnessing the royal flight, the majority of the Persian center collapsed. This was followed by Bessus's left, which gradually began disengaging in good order. The time was now for Alexander to seize Darius and with him the crown of the Achaemenid Empire, and so the chase began. However, before the bold and triumphant king of Macedonia could ride to claim his imperial prize, an urgent message arrived from Parmenion. The situation in the rear was critical. Unaware that their monarch had been driven off the field, Musaeus and his overwhelming cavalry wing was on the verge of snatching victory from the jaws of defeat. Moreover, a stray band of Persian and Indian cavalry had drifted through a gap in the Macedonian phalanx and were ransacking the camp. Almost certainly gritting his teeth in frustration, Alexander looked back to where his loyal general required his urgent assistance, and forth where Darius was distancing himself with every passing second. After that second of hesitation, Alexander turned his troops around and charged the inner rear of the cavalry bearing down on Parmenion. Although victorious in this action also, against some of the best Parthian and Indian horsemen, over 60 of the companions were killed in the battle's hardest fighting. With the vast majority of Darius's army scattered to the four winds, and the Macedonians fully in control of the field, Parmenion rode to secure the Persian camp. The troops, meanwhile, were allowed a well-deserved rest. Alexander could hardly be too irritated that his enemy had escaped. Darius's second great army had been almost totally destroyed, his authority undermined, and the great king himself shown to be a coward unable to defend his empire. That being said, Darius had slipped the net, first to Arbela, where he regrouped with Bessus, and then further east. With the defeat of the last of the great king's organized forces, it was now time to move east into the great expanse of the Persian Empire, where Darius was to be captured and Alexander could move on to the edge of the world. Our series on the Wars of Alexander will continue soon, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube.
That's crazy odds that he defied, man. Darius's army was 4 times Alexander's army. Almost 4 times. It's just strategy, man. Strategy and tactics. Tactics. Yeah? Battle tactics, man. I think that's the... Like, to become a general, I guess this is why being a general is so hard. It's like being a quarterback, being a general, you know? It's like you have to play the game itself physically. You have to now run around. Maybe quarterback's not so much, but you still get hit out there. Yeah? I guess not all generals. Yeah, the comparison is accurate. Being a general is like being a quarterback. Some quarterbacks sit back and orchestrate things. They don't like to get hit. They don't like the physicality of things. But some quarterbacks, like is it Josh Allen? Is that his name? Yeah. He likes the physicality of the game. He wants to get hit. He wants to run around and hit people and jump around and risk big hits, you know. That's Alexander. Some guys are really good, but they are more in the background, you know. But it's still, at the same time, being a general is tough. The main comparison with being a quarterback is coming up or having to deal with like the bigger picture and tactics and orchestrating things. You should be there doing that. You should be there doing that. You should be there doing that. That's the craziest thing about being a general, man. You know, this guy goes did before the battle on a scouting recon mission, sees the size of the army, is kind of taken aback. He goes, but he knows because they are clearing a field, these guys, their plan is to fight here. Like that would be a great distraction, man. But it's such a huge energy expenditure to make people clear an area like that, a field like that is a battle arena, and then you just use that as a decoy, as misdirection. I think that's a lot of work to put your men through. But I feel like he sees them preparing the field and is like, already I know that that's where you guys plan to fight. But they were confident because of the size of the army alone, dude. You know, they had like 4 times the size of his army. I understand why they they felt like a pitched battle would work. They cleared the field. It's not like they were hiding that this is what we're going. This is where we are going to fight. Maybe they were. I don't think they were bothered that much with Alexander finding out that they were preparing a field and stuff. I think they were confident in their numbers. You know, Alexander sees this and is like, okay, I'll try to disrupt that as much as possible. You guys need to be on the field. I'll make you. So if I move here, you'll have to move because you're worried about me encircling you, okay? And Darius, he's a retreatable, bro, you know? He's another quarterback that doesn't like, he's a quarterback that doesn't like to get hit, Darius. He's a QB, he's there. He's a game manager, you know, who doesn't like to get hit. Alexander is like Josh Allen, who's another QB that likes to get hit out there. Mahomes doesn't mind getting hit, you know, but it's more Josh Allen. He's more, you know, in the mix, man. Darius is a cautious QB, game management QB, hands the ball to the running back all the time, you know, that kind of QB. So what will Darius do now, man? He's fled, he's regrouped with Bessos, some other guys. This was his second time facing off with Alexander. I wonder if he'll show back up. I wonder if we'll see Bessos again. Not Bessos, but Darius. Because as long as he's out there, he's still a problem. He can always just master an army and just come back and try again. You know, it's not like the Persians want to be ruled by Macedonians. It's not like they'll be like, yo, dude, you're running away too much. Maybe they could kill him and give the throne to someone who's running away all the time. You know? But I feel like Darius is doing a good job of assembling an army. It's just not good. It's just being destroyed every time by Alexander. But shout out to him for coming back. I think he'll be back at that time. I don't know how long, but Battle of Gaugamela. Gaugamela, not Gaugamela, Gaugamela. Wow, that was a big one, dude. That was a big one, man. Alexander is doing amazing things with just a moderately sized army that is well drilled, well disciplined, well commanded. People like Parmenion. You know, I like Parmenion for some reason. I feel like Parmenion is like these are the guys I feel like Parmenion and who's the other guy on the other side? But it's usually okay. It's usually the phalanx in the middle. The phalanx has multiple commanders, yeah, several commanders commanding like different lines of the phalanx. So there's a bunch of commanders there, and then usually on the right you have Alexander, and on the left you have Parmenion. Okay, Parmenion feels like Alexander's right hand. I think one of his kids. I think two of his kids are commanders in the phalanx. I think. I think. I think two of them. I think. Um. Yeah, that was good. That was a big win for Alexander, man. This is a big one. This is a big one because he's beating Darius for the second time with a bigger army, making him look ridiculous, making him run. Like this is big, man. Like the size of the army he's fighting. Like this will boost his credibility even higher, man. Like I don't think Persia should even fight back at this point. Jesus, imagine seeing this shit live, dude. The phalanx also performed well in this one. It looks like, you know. I'm also fascinated by those chariots that have blades. I remember seeing that chariot in Gladiator. There's a woman who gets sliced by that chariot, that blade. I didn't know they were for real. You know, so I can see how they can cause damage to a phalanx if they don't move. Because you ride close to them on the flanks or even behind them, you can do a lot of damage with that blade. You just ride close to them from behind, from the side, because they're facing forward with their fucking uh, what's it called? Is it a sarax? They're facing forward with those spears, those long spears. Are they called a sarax? I don't know. Yeah. If it's a poorly commanded phalanx unit, they can be wrecked by that chariot, man. Their legs are gone. You know. Or even if they defend, it's like it would wreck their formation, turning around to fend off a chariot attack from behind. Those massive spears, man. Yeah. But Alexander's men knew how to deal with it. They just moved. They knew. They knew, man. Like I would love to see like someone design. You know, it's fascinating watching people design tactics and plays and stuff. It's like designing battle tactics, especially uh for this time when you had to go out there and physically fight people. You couldn't just bomb them from a remote location somewhere. Seeing someone sit down and draw up battle tactics. I feel like that's like watching a coach sit down and draw up plays and set up their team and this is how we attack. I feel like I don't have the mind for that kind of thing, but I'm always blown away by those people. I feel like a general is like that, man. People who can read a game, who can read the game and see the game plan and visualize it in their heads, you know. Wow. I feel like people like Parmenion are very underrated. I feel like Alexander has a really good team around him. The army is good and it's commanded by very good people. That's the circle of Alexander. Those commanders, you know? And then Alexander adds this fire He's the fire. You know, he's the fire, but um, the pieces of wood going into the fire, people like Parmenion, Antipater, and these other various commanders. But the fire itself is Alexander, man. I feel like he brings personality to the mix. That's what he brings. He brings personality, bravery, conviction. I feel like he's one hell of a person, dude. Like just personality wise. Especially his personality on the battlefield. You know? Especially his personality on the battlefield. His zeal, his bravery, his just desire to get out there, man. I feel like the soldiers see that shit and they just get, that's the secret sauce, man. You know, the secret sauce. But people like Parmenion and these other commanders, very important too, man. Very important, man. It's like a coach with his assistants, man. Very important.